The iPhone sales concerns are a real problem. The fact that we're likely going into our fifth quarter in a row of revenue decline, that's a big problem. That's something that hasn't happened in the modern Steve Jobs nor Tim Cook eras. The fact that this new product category they're launching is not going to have any mainstream pickup for several years or generate any material revenue, that's a problem. The fact that Massimo proved that you could beat Apple in a patent infringement lawsuit and get their product off the market, that's a really big deal. So there's a lot of negative noise around Apple. I still think that the fundamentals, the moat they've created, the ecosystem, the iPhone, people holding on to their devices, buying new services, I think that's all pretty strong, but it just feels a little weaker than it ever has.
Anurag, I see you nodding here from Chicago. Tell us your thoughts based on what you heard from Mark.
All of this, iPhone weakness came out when they reported results on November the 2nd. That's when we knew when they missed China numbers by a big amount. We had heard about, competition from Huawei. All of those things are important because we were hoping that by this year we should see a improvement in China smartphone sales. Only because the year before we had COVID-related problems and there was a depression in sales. I think that really is something that, when they came and gave guidance, to be honest, I was surprised that the stock didn't react the way it's reacting now at that time. So I think it could be a year-end, portfolio management or whatever it was. But I agree, this year is going to be tough for them. They're going to grow somewhere between 3 to 5% revenue. Then you buy, a little bit of buybacks in between. So this is the new normal for Apple. It has been for the last 2 years.
Well, Anurag, let me follow. The new normal, does that mean Apple at some point needs to think about China not being as big a market as it has planned for it to be?
Well, China is a big market for them. There is no way out of it. But the way you want to think about Apple in totality, and I'm only going to focus on iPhones right now because that's really what drives the product growth, at least in the near term. When you look at the global market, they have a very high market share in the U.S., which is a mature market. Then the next big market is China, where they have less than 18% of unit market share. But as people become more rich, they go out with and get a more premium brand. Then the next big market is going to be India, where they have less than 5% market share in terms of the units. So the way you want to think about Apple is over the next 3 to 5 years, the big unit shipment, numbers are going to come from China, and after that, India. In the U.S., we have phones, we're going to refresh it, 3 years, 3.5 years, 4 years, and that's a bit of a saturated market. So China is the growth engine when it comes to phones, and that's where we are seeing some, I would say, slowdown.
Hey, Mark, for years, we've been hearing about how the iPhone just powers Apple. And indeed, it does account for more than 50% of the company's revenue. But we've also heard the risks associated with that. What is the most compelling new product category for Apple that will help offset some of this slowing iPhone growth?
It's an interesting question. People for years, like you said, have been talking about, is it a risk that everything revolves around the iPhone and half the revenue comes from the iPhone? I think it's even worse than that because you're buying AirPods if you have an iPhone. You're buying an Apple Watch if you have an iPhone. All these services that Apple are selling, Fitness Plus, TV Plus, Apple Music, the App Store, every time you download an app, where are those downloads happening? It's happening on the iPhone. How many people own an iPad or a Mac and don't own an iPhone? How many people buy an iPhone before they buy an iPad or a Mac? So if you really think about the ecosystem in totality, it is 100% built around the iPhone. This new Vision Pro, to answer your question about new product categories to drive revenue, that's not going to drive revenue anytime soon. If they sell out of all their inventory for 24, you're talking about a 3 to 4 billion in just revenue alone, probably about $1 billion in profit, maybe a little bit less. That's nothing, right? I mean, Anurag can get into how minuscule that is. And so I think long-term, mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, those are fine categories for Apple. But I think right now it's nothing more than a pipe dream in terms of that becoming a revenue generator.